I am actually the Board of Director for ITSMF India. So with that intro, I will get things started. As like any webinar, I would encourage you to submit your questions using the questions panel, and we will take it up as we move on in a logical break. Okay. So with no further ado, let me get started to talk about service transition, winning with service management. Now, setting up the objectives for today's webinar. At the end of the session, you will be able to understand the overview of ITIL service transition. We'll talk about magic triangle. What does magic triangle mean here? How do you control your IT infrastructure? As you know, ITIL stands for IT Infrastructure Library. So we're going to talk about how do you effectively control stability of your IT infrastructure. How do you deliver seamless service and solutions? At the end of the day, you need to deliver service which is, by definition, delivering outcomes and value without the associated cost and risk, right? So we'll talk about how to deliver seamless services and solutions. Then talk about some of the challenges and pitfalls when it comes to change management. Change management has been there for quite a long time, but still we have challenges and pitfalls that people fall a trap. So we will talk about some of those elements as to what you need to do in order to take advantage. And then finally, how do you win with change management? So as you know, service transition is one of the core volumes of ITIL, and we will talk about all of these processes, but in principle, we will spend a lot of time on change management. Okay, so this is going to be our objective for today's webinar. Feel free to post your questions if you have anything as we move on, and we will take it up as we get the logical breaks. Now, to start with, let's understand what is customer satisfaction. And again, this boils down to the definition of a service, where service is means of delivering value or outcomes to the customer or an end user without the associated cost and risk. That means, as if you are a service provider who's into any kind of business, right? It could be retail business, telecom, insurance, manufacturing, any kind of business, you need to, the customer is paying you for the service, and what he is expecting is to, so let's talk about, the difference, right? So what we have to understand primarily is what is required, right? When we talk about customer satisfaction as a service provider, you need to understand what your customer is expecting, but also how they are perceiving. So if you go to a restaurant and you sit in a restaurant and have your food, how do you say it's an excellent service? It could be your ambience, it could be the quality of food, it could be the time for delivery, it could be the different kind of cuisine that you are having it across. But if one of those parameters don't go well, then your satisfaction is not complete, right? So it's important to understand that the perception is a combination of all the touch points where the service provider is interfacing with the customer. So your customer satisfaction is not transactional. It's the whole unified experience that they experience during the transactions in various transactions and do that. So it's be very important to understand the difference between the expectations and what they perceive to receive. So one of the things that you need to think about is when you are delivering a service, it's not about just selling a business, selling a product or a service or a solution. How are your customers using those services or solutions for their benefit is a very important aspect to understand the customer behavior. Now, when it talks about service transition, what's the purpose of service transition, right? It could be two folds. One is setting the customer expectations on how you are rolling out new services, or you are making modification to an existing service. So that's one way of looking at service transition. The other way of looking at service transition could be, let's say if you are a large outsourcing business where you are involved in supporting a particular customer. Let's say for argument's sake, let's say a company ABC is supported by a vendor called Edureka. So if Edureka, the company ABC decides that to move from Edureka to some other company X, then we need to know how the scope of services that was provided by Edureka is going to be provided by company X. So transition from an existing service provider to a new service provider, right? So that also will be a part of service transition. And that will become transitioning planning and looking at what are the opportunities, how do we go about and addressing those elements. So as you know, it's going to be a complex process and in fact one of the challenging ones in current days context, because the service provider is changing, the requirements are changing, the business models are changing, the customer is becoming extremely savvy. So how do you manage resources? So resources could be hardware, software, technology, people, all of them, you know, to make sure that the new or changed services that goes into production is with that kind of quality, with the appropriate cost and time estimates, right? So if you look at quality, we're talking about risk, quality, deliverables. So if you are going to do a transition, you probably have a timeline of probably 3 months or 6 months, depending on what is the complexity. So you need to deliver or make sure that this transition is seamless from one service provider to other service provider, or from an existing service to a new service, or modification of an existing service, right? So when you make these transition, it has to make sure it is being delivered on time with the right kind of quality and the cost, right? You don't have an infinite budget that you can spend for completing the transition. So in fact, I have actually played a role of transition project manager when we moved with an existing tool set of an existing products tool set to a new product tool set. So we had to align processes, tools, people, and work with the clients to move them from the current model of operation to the future model of operation. It could be simple as Microsoft has stopped supporting Windows XP, right? And if you are an existing customer with Windows XP, you need to move on to the next one. Then how do you move on the existing install base to Windows 7 or Windows 8? So that's something that you need to think about from an overall service transition perspective. Now let's deep dive into service transition. What are the processes, and give you a flavor of what the respective processes are. So this is the overall picture that you are able to see in the context of service transition. Again, this is from the earlier books of OGC, Office of Government Commerce. So if you look at this, you have service transition planning and support. You have change management, service asset and configuration management. Then we are talking about evaluation, release and deployment management, service validation and testing, and knowledge management. Right? So if we are going to talk about all of these processes in detail, where we see how this is being associated, right? So for example, if you look at the naming conventions, first one, and continual service improvement is an encompassing one that oversees improvements, specific improvements that you're going to witness in all of these existing processes, right? So from a service transition scoping perspective, these are the processes. So if you take change management, the starting point is going to be your RFC, which is request for change. Then you're going to look at service asset and configuration management, which is going to be looking at your configuration items, their status, looking at the CMDB or CMS, which is to make sure that it is from the trusted source, and then you use those components of infrastructure, be it server, database, storage, and then use it to transition. So there is a team called the Transition Planning and Support Team, which coordinates between different resources, different teams, and sees how this needs to be dealt with. We also will talk about organizational change, which is an integral part of how you look at the service transition. Then evaluating whether it is suitable enough, and then once everything is tested, which is again a part of service validation and testing, you release those into production. So release and deployment management is the process which will make sure that the build and test gets into production. So you will have a release calendar which will give you a timeline of when this has to be released, right? And over the period of doing this, you also will need to do early lifecycle support. That means you need to have, as a development team, you need to also help the operations team to be aware of what is the new product, what is the new release, what is the new service that you've rolled out. So in case if there are any issues or questions that comes from people or for users, then the operations team is better prepared to answer them. Yeah. So that's the aspect of looking at the concept of release and deployment management along with early lifecycle support. So after transition, the output is going to service operations. So which means you prepare everything, it's gone live, it's up and running, then we go to operations, which is more of business as usual, keeping the lights on. Over a period of this one, knowledge management is again a very important process, that is to make sure that we maintain, enhance the quality of knowledge required in all of these processes, right? And you use to improve the overall capability of your organization in handling service transition smoothly. So you can think about like a PMO, you can think about organization process assets that you can build across like kind of knowledge base, which is going to be instrumental to leverage if there is a new transition coming across. And so you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can use that for your benefit of doing service transition better. So we talked about all of these stuff, and just breaking down into elements. The process that supports a life cycle. So you have change management, service asset and configuration management, and knowledge management. So it's again going through a cycle change. And other processes within service transition is transition planning and support, which I talked to. There is a core team, which is the transition team planning across. It could be an example that, let's say you have an existing company acquired by a new company. So we are talking about mergers and acquisitions. So then there is a transition team which works on to make sure that the alignment happens. So for example, you might have duplicate resources, duplicate skills. So you have to move off certain people, you have to redeploy certain people. So that also will be done as part of planning and support during mergers and acquisitions. Then release and deployment management we talked about. Service validation and testing, which is again, we have the V model, service V model, that we will do a proper validation and testing. It could be unit testing, integration testing, functional testing, regression testing, evaluate whether it is suitable enough, and then you deploy it, right? So these are typical service transition processes that are encompassing as part of ITIL is concerned. Now, one of the things that I will spend time is organizational change and stakeholder management. Remember, it's very, very important to understand how your people are responding to the change. I know a lot of organizations which are upbeat on saying we are going to do a transformation journey, like moving from a traditional infrastructure to a cloud-based offering. It looks great, but what happens to the people? People understand, will I have my job? Will I lose my job because I'll become redundant? So you need to really address the emotional aspect of what happens for people, right? What will be the implications of not going with the change, right? So it's important to understand the organizational change when we are doing the aspect of transition. So if you look at transition planning, as we talked about, look at what is the appropriate approach that you would do in transition, and look at size and nature of service. Is it going to be an outsourcing service? Is it going to be done by your own people, or it going to be outsourced? What is the kind of release cycle that we are talking about? and make an integrated planning and coordination. So there'll be different teams. It could be cross-functional teams. It could be suppliers. It could be third-party vendors that you need to work with in order to roll out a service. You know, remember, the service is not always done completely through you. You might have certain suppliers. You could be having some internal teams that you would work with to deliver the end service. So transition planning and support ensures that from service strategy, where you have the requirements that are encoded in service design, which is service design comes out with a service design package, and that package is used to make sure that the transition works to so that it successfully passes it on to the service operations. Any questions? I see one question. How do you make a developer follow the change management process when they work on UAT and not in production? The second one I had was, I'll just come back. What is organizational change and how does it differ from change management? So that's a question from Satish Kini. So I will take the question of Tanin, which is a little later, and I will talk about organizational change and change management. Now, when it talks about organizational change, we are talking about the readiness, the preparation readiness. So it could be on people, it could be on processes, it could be on tools, it could be on partners, it could be on third-party systems, everything, right? So people are a crucial component of organizational change, and what organizational change is focuses on the emotional aspects as well. Are we really prepared? Are you really going to get buy-in from people? So what happens is there is a strategy that is communicated from the top. You know, the senior level management says that we are going to go into cloud offering. Now nobody goes and communicates to the next level of teams and sub teams and say what is needed to get it done. How are the people going to take it up? What kind of skills and competencies that are going to be needed in order to develop that? These aspects are not governed as part of the ITIL change management process. The ITIL change management process is primarily focused on infrastructure changes. So how are you going to do a server? How are you going to go the configuration items, the updates, and looking at the entire business impact analysis? You do more from an infrastructure related of change management. What I'm looking at organizational change management is all of these elements: people, process, templates, readiness, bandwidth, and everything put together, right? It could be a transition checklist. It could be looking at whether people have the required competencies, what level of trainings that we need to prepare, what kind of turnaround time that we need to have in order to get people ready for the rollout of new services. So that's a different element as mentioning as organized change as compared to change management. Hope that answers your question, Satish. Now we go to the service asset and configuration management. Again, this is going to be talking about best practice process, where you have a simple way to look at it is you have an email service. Let's say you provide desktop support or a Windows support or Unix support, or you just provide an email service through an Outlook or through Lotus Notes or anything. You manage their mailboxes. So you want to know that email service has underneath an Exchange server, which is supporting the email service. So if you are making a change to Exchange server, what happens to your email service? So underneath you will have a web server, app server, database. So you need to know the entire topology of how your services are aligned, what components are building, what is the relationship, and if you make any change to, let's say, a server in terms of disk, CPU utilization, how that makes a difference. So you start with the baseline, look at what is the best provided configuration, and then you update it as part of your requirements. So a simplified example could be, in your organizations, everybody is shipped with a standard desktop or a laptop with predefined configurations, standard out of the box softwares and things. Now what they want to know is to understand, if you make a change to, let's say, inbuilt RAM is basically, let's say, 1 gig RAM, and then you want to upgrade it to 2 gig, then there has to be a business justification of why you need to go to 2 gig RAM, and then you make those changes. So it talks about all of those elements from a configuration item, which is responsible to deliver a service. So configuration item is something which is uniquely identifiable, which contributes to the service, and it changes its status over a period of life cycle. So it could go from installed to in production to retired. It could go with different status. So those things are all managed in a logical database called CMDB, and a combination of configuration management database is nothing but a configuration management system. So ITIL V3 talks about configuration management system, where you have the entire service tree structure, where you can use it to assess your change impact, business impact analysis for rolling out changes. Okay, so validation and testing, again, service validation and testing is primarily looking at elements of what is being tested, right? How do you ensure that things are working as required, and ensure that the business requirements, the stakeholder requirements are all done. So normally we have a transition checklist where we will make sure that the customer does a sign off and says yes, it is ready to go for deployment, and then you go there and do it across. So so that's the part of service validation and testing, where you are looking at ways to make sure that it fits for purpose, it is just fit for use, right? So you will talk about this terminologies like utility and warranty, where what the customer is asking is what you're going to give, right? So let's say if you have a broadband connection from a company, and you expect that to be seamlessly running across, and if there is a downtime, an unplanned downtime, then you ask them what was the committed service levels, why is it not working? So it has to fit for purpose, and it has to be fit for use. You know? Think about you buying a car, the engine is the most important aspect. So the engine is to work. So you get a warranty to make sure that the engine is running seamlessly, so that you can drive your car at ease. So those elements to look at all the checks and balance is going to be done through service validation and testing. Okay. So that's another process within the service transition. Then we come to the change management. I'm going to talk about the change management and probably address Tanen's question. But let's get first to understand what is change management. Now, change management is a process which primary objective is to have a stabilized infrastructure. That means any changes that you're going to make in your IT infrastructure is planned, it is analyzed for risk, it is done for impact analysis, and said, is it doable? You have a backup plan, you have a remediation plan to ensure that nothing goes hayward, and then you release it into production, right? So when you are going to release it into production, first is to understand what's the stability of the infrastructure, right? So one could be, am I making a lot of emergency changes? If you make a lot of emergency changes, that also means that you're not going to have adequate testing time, which means that your infrastructure is going to be highly unstable. But you cannot always avoid emergency change, because if there is suddenly something going down, the site is down, you need to keep up and running, you need to always have that differentiator which will qualify for emergency change. So you need to have a balance between stability and flexibility, right? For example, we are talking about agile changes, you know, we are looking at sprints. So the development teams are no longer waiting for a waterfall method. They run short sprints to release the products and services in a quick span of time. So how is your release management going to work across? How is you going to be a build, test, and change cycle going to go across? So you need to be governing the fact of stability and flexibility when you deliver these changes, right? The essential aspect as far as change management is control, right? You need to exhibit control. Only then you can have your stabilized IT infrastructure, right? Now, Tanen, if you could hold on to my next slide, and then I will explain your question. Because what's a change management process? And this is the ITIL way of looking at what change management process works. So you create an RFC, which is a request for change. You record it. You review the RFC from the reason for the change, what will happen if you don't do it, the justification for the change, and you assess, right? You assess whether it is doable, what's the kind of risk. So you do a risk impact analysis and see whether we have done these kind of changes before, what is the likelihood of this getting failed, do you have a fail out plan, a remediation plan, what kind of resources is required, what kind of funding is required. It could be upgradation of server, which would require a budget. So if you don't have a budget, how will you do that? So then you assess and evaluate the change, and then it goes to the change advisory board. There are certain changes that will go through the advisory board. A standard change might not go with the advisory board. So you have a CAB members, which could be a combination of service desk manager, release manager, problem manager, incident manager, a change manager who's going to be the chairman of the change advisory board. They look at all the list of changes, they review it and make sure that everything is tested, everybody gives a sign off, and then they authorize, and then they move on. Then it goes to build, test, and then you review and close. And throughout the life cycle of that particular change, you need to make sure that it is integral part of your change management and the configuration management, right? So I need to know which changes are being dealt with, and where is my configuration item. So if I'm making a change to my Exchange server, I need to know what is my current status of Exchange server, what are the parameters, what parameter I'm changing, and that gets up to date so that anybody who's looking into the CMS or CMDB should be able to get those information at runtime, right? And normally you also do the post-implementation review to see whether the issue that you wanted to address as part of the known error is fixed. So the first question is what I'm having done in. So probably you can tell me how that works. How to make developer follow the change management process when they work on UAT and not in production. So Tanin, first one is when you are a developer, right? So you first need to make sure that so normally we have two teams. One is the change management team and then the release and deploy management team. Under the change management team, so you have a development team which is primarily doing the build and testing. So they only do their testing, the build part and the test part, and then they leave it across. So they have done their work, and then it goes to the validation and testing team. So that testing team is not going to be someone from the developer, right? So it's a dedicated testing team who looks into the functional cases, use case scenarios, and does the testing, proper testing of those elements, and then say everything is tested fine, and they make a sign off. So then that is, they do it in UAT, and then after this developer is no longer involved in production, his job is completed. So then there is a release and management team which is going to deploy the entire package, right? It could be binaries, it could be the source files, everything together, and they deploy into production. So developer's work is completed as soon as he completes his development work. Even in the UAT, it's going to be the dedicated testing team which is going to test it, and then the deployment team is going to be deploying that into production. Hope that answers your question, first question, Tanin. I've not got your second question, so you need to type in again. So the next question is Vijay Krishna Rudra, who asked about what are we referring to CMS in this slide. So as I told you, Vijay Krishna, the way we are talking about CMS is called Configuration Management System. So this Configuration Management System, if I could just go a little bit earlier, is a component of this infrastructure, right? So all the Exchange server, so if you're making a change to Exchange server, so I need to know how the topology works, how the Exchange servers is related to a web server, to an app server, to the database. Then that information is what you will have it in the CMS. So then I look at the configuration management system, which has the entire topology of what I showed, and say what parameters I'm going to change, and if I make a change to that particular process, what will happen. So it is very important that your configuration management system is up to date, so that when you're making a change, it is making the change in the right component with the right parameters. It could be disk capacity, it could be CPU, it could be additional RAM. So you need to always refer configuration management system when you are doing the change management process. I hope, Vijay, Krishna, that answers your question. Okay, so we move on. Release and deployment management. This is primarily, again, talking about authorized softwares, authorized hardwares, and then you deliver. So we talked about the build and test is getting completed. Once that is completed, the release and deployment management team make sure that they package it and then they deploy into production. They also do the necessity of managing the early lifecycle support. That means they talk with the operations team and then they give them training or any documentation so that if there are any issues that are coming out of rolling out a new product or release or solution, you are still able to address that as part of the operations, right? So that's the release and deployment process where they make sure that it is delivered to the stakeholder requirements and objectives. So normally release and deployment could be done in a phased manner, or it could be a big bang. For example, let's take an example of you are hooked to your network. There are certain level of patches, security patches that get forcefully sent across to all the client machines. So the moment you hook on to your network, that gets up to date. So that's a kind of a push, that's kind of a forced one that they deploy. There are certain things which could be unphased where they use it on a certain pilot environment, test if it works, and then they roll it out to other geographies or other departments. So you can have a mix of these approaches of a phased approach versus a big bang, push approach that you're pushing the entire patches, or like what you have in iPhone or entire apps that you have. If you go to any of the app on a Facebook app or a Twitter or a LinkedIn app, you can see a cloud, and then there is a website like a train website, and you are looking on a Tatkal booking or a booking where we are looking at a time of 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, and then suddenly it says page not found, and it actually crashes. So you should have underestimated the number of concurrent users who are going to hit on your website, right? So it's important to understand the service performance, looking at number of concurrent users, what's going to be the bandwidth, where are you going to be having your server located, and then evaluate in terms of anticipated performance, so that what you had envisioned as part of providing a service is what is being delivered to your customers or to your end users, right? So evaluation is to evaluate whether how to evaluate the performance of the service changes. Is it actually being meaningful, or are we having any undesirable effect from a performance standpoint? Knowledge management, and then this is again from the ITIL core books. Remember, ITIL is the proprietary of Axelos. The ITIL core book talks about DAKW. So what are we talking about in the context of service transition is, as a team, when you're doing a transition, it could be rolling out of a new product, release, or changing from an existing service. You need to be aware of what's the knowledge that you have. You know, let's say if the organization decides to move from a traditional infrastructure to a cloud-based offering, do you have capability of cloud-based offering? Do you know what are the ways to create a cloud model, like public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud? What kind of resources, bandwidth, infrastructure is required? Do you have people capable in terms of supporting those cloud offering, right? So those aspect of knowledge, you know, needs to do it. So you can have various data points that you start with, that gets moved into information. So you make a information as to who's provided the information, what kind of information, when this is available, where is it available, and then you understand the knowledge, right? So you process your data, you get some information, and over a period of time you understand how this particular information can be used to address your pains, provide solutions, provide value-added services, and then over a period of time, as you get experience, right, you go into wisdom. So simple thing would be, in a life that you talk about, you start your life right from childhood, grow into a teenager to an adult, and then you've learned the lessons of life, and then you come to a state of maturity so that you have adequate wisdom to see how things work, because you have gone through the entire roller coaster ride of having pain and pleasure in different facets of your career, your personal life, understanding how the rules of the game works in terms of cause and effect, and then you come up with the wisdom, right? So similarly, it could be in your existing workload, in existing infrastructure, in your software, in your hardware, in terms of rolling out new services. So knowledge management has to be a part of a culture. You know, I know a lot of people just have it in SharePoints or in Wikipedias. You need to access this knowledge management. I mean, if you don't access the knowledge resources on a runtime, then what's the point of just having it stored into databases, right? So it's important that it has to be available, it has to be relevant, and then up to date, so that people are making use of the knowledge management assets. Now, coming on to the core of what we wanted is how to win with change management, right? And this is what we're talking about. Some of the things when you want to win with change management is not talking about infrastructure change alone, but managing organizational or stakeholder changes. So please understand, people are different, their emotions are different, their skills are different, their experience are different, their maturity is different. So it's never easy to get the people, that is the service desk staff, the staff at that the first level, second level, third level layer to work. So it's never easy. So it takes a long period of time to get their buy-in, to get their support, to get them trained so that they work and then they work well. So it can bring risk if they don't cooperate well, if they don't learn it well, and if they don't equip themselves with new skills, it's going to be an issue. So it's going to be inevitable and required, and it has to be led and managed. So we normally talk about change agents. Change agents are people who are instrumental in leading a change. That means a transformational change. It could be an infrastructure change. It could be an entire service change, right? From moving from an existing infrastructure, homegrown infrastructure to a cloud-based offering. It could be a scenario of consolidating all your data centers. So it could be any of those changes, but all of them have to be led and managed by effective leadership team who understands the emotions of people, right? If you don't understand people's resisting change, dissatisfaction, if you don't address them adequately, then it's going to be a disaster. So you need to give adequate time for a transformation journey in order to get people up to speed, because someone would be resisting, someone would be embracing change. So you need to get collectively a team to work together and then have them work to make it work successful, right? So organization change management is a key component that is always underestimated when you do a lot of these transformation and transition journeys. So what's a magic triangle? Change management does not act in silos, right? For change management, as we talked about, you need to have adequate configuration management systems, so that is having up-to-date of the configuration items, where it says which changes are going to be made, what is the timeline in which you're going to make change, and then once you make the changes, you need to have an effective release management process that deploys that particular releases. So that means if I am as a change manager, I need to know what is my release schedule, what kind of changes can I bundle it and roll it out, so that I can communicate back to my customer that these changes are going to be part of the next cycle. So you can also say that we are not going to make any release here because the next release is only in August 2nd week. So all changes have to wait. So if you have a strong release management process, policies, and that governs that, then you can inform your customer that you have to wait. But if you don't have a strong release and deployment management process, then you have to turn to the tune of what your customer asks. So it's important to have both configuration management systems, that is to have the entire topology created well, managed well, updated well, runtime, and also an effective release management process. So this is what we call it as magic triangle. So you get the direction from release, you make the update, relevant updates to the configuration management system, and that information is again rolled out to change. So it's a cycle, and these are like a triangle where together, when they work in tandem with good coordination, then you become a lot more successful. So if you need to win with change management, you need to have a strong magic triangle of change management, configuration management, and release management. Now, how do you control the IT infrastructure? So as I told you, the whole entire infrastructure is quite dynamic. You have network, server, storage, database, messaging systems, active directories, and stuff like that. So as a change management, when we are talking about using this magic triangle, look at how changes are prioritized. How are you going to prioritize the changes of normal changes, a major change, a minor change, or a standard change, right? So you need to have clear definitions. What will qualify for an emergency change? What will qualify for a standard change? And then make sure that it's approved as required from the change advisory board, and then you put it on to the release. So the release management, you should have a release cycle. It has to notify well in advance, so you know what is the maintenance window, what's the planned downtime, when are the changes going to go into production, what changes are going to go to production. They need to come up with release notes. All of that has to be done, right? And that changes updated is going to be on configuration management. Typically, we talk this as an audit environment where you make those changes and see what is the baseline configuration and what has changed. So the example that I talked about, you have a particular a RAM, a desktop with 1 GB RAM as a baseline, but then it moves on to look at a 2 GB RAM. So from the existing state that you move on to the to make a change to that, and that is audited, and they ask you why did you change the RAM from 1 gig to 2 gig? So there has to be a justification for it. So it can be used very well for a configuration, for an auditing purpose, and because you're having it up to date, it could be essential used for impact analysis. Remember, we talked about assessing the change from a business impact analysis, risk analysis. So you need to have those things in place for it to move forward on those directions. So some of the things that we will talk about and talk about this one is how do we come up with probable use cases. If you don't have a CMDB or CMS which are up to date, then we will not be able to have this working well, because you will make some changes which are not correctly reflecting to the current context of your configuration management system. That will means that you will do improper impact analysis, and that will fail miserably. Then the change management policies that will talk about what will qualify for a emergency change, what will qualify for a normal change, what will qualify for a standard change. People always misuse this. You know, people say everything is change is important, and they put that across into a change, classify a change like an emergency change. So you need to make sure that the definitions are fulfilled and there is a governance, right? So you cannot just accommodate all changes that comes on a time. People just come on a Friday and then say, I need to get this one rolled out on a Saturday or Sunday. It doesn't work. So until you have a proper governance mechanism of a change advisory board which acts as the key decision maker without getting influenced by bureaucracy and stuff, you can go on that. So governance is a very important element to make the right checks and balance in terms of looking at how to deal with those elements, right? And as I told you, the magic triangle is important. If you don't have integration with CMS and release management, they need to know which components are released, what changes are being done. So that is very critical. So you need to have proper integration between change, configuration management, and release management so that they talk the same language. So you know exactly how this works in reality when it goes from the conceptual phase to release in production. So as I told you, we need to have definitions of normal, standard, emergency, and please measure the right KPIs and metrics. There are a whole lot of KPIs and metrics that the ITIL gives you, but sometimes that might not be relevant to the context of what you are measuring in your organization. So you need to have specific key performance indicators and metrics that are aligned with the expectation of what you have, right? So that's something that you need to think about when it comes to some of the challenges and pitfalls that we have already seen the change management failing across. This is the penultimate slide before I go to the next things. So if you want to win with change management, so what we have seen so far is how do you win with change management. You need to make sure that there are 4 components. One is the IT infrastructure components, where you are assessing the processes, tools, making sure the provisioning is being done properly. You're doing proper maintenance and repair. That means if server goes down, do you have a regular maintenance window? Do you have people who have got right skills and competencies to manage? So you need to have a person who's skilled with Wintel or Unix, specifically dedicated to have Wintel support or Unix support, right? So you need to hire people. You should have people who have got expertise in those technologies, be it on Active Directory, be it on LDAP, be it on storage, be it on database, be it for SQL Server or RDBMS like Oracle. You need to have dedicated people who have got that strong skills and competencies to help address that. Configuration management, as I told you, you need to do business impact analysis. You should have an up-to-date CMDB or CMS, which is configuration management system. Have proper attributes. You need to know how an Exchange server is attached to an email service, and under Exchange server, what is the web server, what is the app server, what is the database that is underlying, and then what is that relationship. You can say a peer-to-peer relationship, upstream relationship, parent-child relationship. So you need to get those first, the topology correct, and you should always start with your configuration management system, because if you don't know what components you are there, then how will you make those changes, right? So it's important to understand the attributes, the relationships when it comes to configuration management part. Then RDM, which is release and deployment management. We have talked about release policy. How frequently will you have a major release? How frequently you will have a minor release? What is the release calendar? Because the change management has to know when can they push these existing changes to the upcoming release, right? It has to have a phased approach, right? So are we doing it for this particular business unit or department or geography, and then slowly use that to align it to various other divisions. The next aspect is on change management itself, right? So if you look at change management, we need to look at change models, right? The change models could be, how do you make an infrastructure upgrade change? So you can have a defined workflow for how will you follow infrastructure change upgrade to a server. You need to have a good change advisory board from representation from all the departments, because they iron out issues from their own perspectives. Because when you are looking at from a developing, you only look at from a developer perspective. So when you have a service desk manager, an incident manager, a change manager, all of them look at from their own perspectives to get and answer those questions, right? So risk assessment has to be done properly, and many of the times which I've seen is they don't do proper post-implementation review. Now this post-implementation review has to be done on a best practice of 30 days after, right? So when you do that after 30 days, you have given adequate time to see the changes that have got into production, has it making an impact, or are there any issues that you are seeing likely to happen across. So that pretty much wraps up my thing across on the change management. So we have Edureka's course that is upcoming. We are doing these ITIL foundation courses, and soon we are rolling out the specific lifecycle modules like service transition. So it's a live online class. We do it on the weekends. It's a class recording. So we do record all the sessions. The presentations are available for users in the learning management system. We have 24/7 post-class support, where you can ask any questions to the instructor, and there's a dedicated support team which will answer all your questions. And in order to make yourself fully familiarized, there is module-wise questions. So like, for example, if you go take about service transition, we will talk about knowledge management, change management, service asset and configuration items. And it's been run by, I deliver some of these courses for Edureka, and this is primarily from practitioners. So we have experience in consulting and implementing ITIL best practice process across different geographies. In fact, I've actually spent a lot of time in Hong Kong, China, Singapore, and I continue to spend time in Southeast Asia to do consulting and implementation of all these processes. So we give us our practical experience of how this has worked, in giving you a perspective. There's no project work at this point, but when you go to the life cycle thing, we will give you case studies where you can review, and then we will discuss and debate as to how this works. And primarily, one of the things that I think is quite different from a context is getting your knowledge to use in your workplace, right? So you need to have some transfer skills as to how you learn what you learn from your course. How can you use it in your environment? So we will talk about those scenarios and stuff to get that across to move forward. So from a foundation course, we covered all these as part of core volumes: service management, so practice, service strategy, service design, transition. We look at the respective processes, we go into detail, and then get things moved on. And then the last one is the continual service improvement, where we talk about the 7-step model and so on. So that's pretty much we have, and hope you had some takeaways from today's session of how to win with service management. So I will now open the floor for any questions, comments, and feedback. And post this webinar, there will be a quick survey. We would really appreciate if you could give us your feedback as to how you experienced the session, and did you get some takeaways from that, so that we can use it for our continual service improvement. So I'm not able to see the question window. Vinayak and team, can you see if there are any questions, and can you pull that out, because I'm not able to see these questions in the room here. So thanks a lot, everybody, for taking the time today and attending this webinar, and we really appreciate your feedback and your questions. Thanks a lot, and hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you.